It's finally happened. The House settlement will be taking effect. So what does that mean for Utah athletics? How will they use the rev share? Also, Utah men's basketball landed a commit. We got a loaded episode of Locked On Utes to start out the week.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. It's your first time listening to this show. Make sure you like and subscribe. Today's show is brought to you by our great friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. My name is JT Wistrcill, excited to be joined on today's show by the host of the Runnin Hoops Pod, Andrew Crowley, kind enough to stop by with me here. Andrew, we got a lot to talk about. Men's basketball added a commit. Also, Carlson could become an NBA champion. That's awesome. But have to start with something that we have been waiting on. That's this House settlement and what it means for Utah. If you're unfamiliar, so the House settlement is basically like, hey, let's get NIL, try to get a lot of this stuff regulated and under constraint. And one thing they want to allow too now is, hey, and this is where Utah comes in more than anything, the schools themselves can now start paying players. Utah will have $20.5 million they can distribute across all of their athletic programs. So just however you divvy it up for each sport. We'll talk about how we think Utah will do that in a moment. But this is massive. Utah said they're ready to pay the full $20 million, and I think this will definitely help Utah to continue to take that next step as a program as they try to compete in the Big 12.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Mark Harlan gave an interview last week at the Big 12 media or the Big 12 meetings rather. And, kind of said the same thing that, they're all in terms of, what their ability is to pay the players and they will be at that maximum of, $20.5 million this upcoming season, with football and men's basketball getting the bulk of that, obviously. I think, they kind of took it up to the wire with, July being right around the corner, and that's kind of when this all takes effect. But, I think some kind of uniform, regulations and agreements and things like that certainly will be beneficial for the sport, be beneficial for college athletics in general, and certainly for a Utah program that has positioned itself to be right there with all of this stuff getting settled.
Yeah, and this is a Utah team and programs, as we mentioned, they're going to use the full $20 million. And Ross Dellinger has reported that most teams are going to use a 75 to 85% football, 10 to 15 men's basketball, and then, 10 to 15 for all your other sports, basically. So if you are Utah, I expect that to be closer to 80, maybe for Utah, maybe closer to 75. We'll see. But somewhere 13 to 16 million of that, I do believe, will go to football. It still drives the mothership that is a college athletic program as a whole. Utah has had a good football program too, and I think they're going to invest a lot in that. And I still think men's basketball, like you mentioned too, that'll be the next thing. And then honestly, it's probably after that, gymnastics. I think that'll be the sport that gets the next most. You'll get your volleyballs in there too, and there'll be other programs, the soccers of the world, that get some of it as well. Baseball, Utah's just opening a new venue, right? So how much does it go into there? But I do think it's the right decision for Utah to pour most into football. It's been their most popular sport, and it's a sport that they've had a lot of success in, and I think can continue to have success. And I don't think they should do what Houston will probably invest a little more in basketball. And I think for Utah, you want it while still investing in basketball, making it your second most. I do think you want to give a lot to football because you're trying to be the best. And all these other teams are going to have access to that $20 million too. They're going to be dumping most of it into football as well.
Yeah, there's a reason why most of those other sports are called non-revenue sports, right? I mean, It's because they don't generate revenue. It sucks to say that, but that's just kind of how it is.
True.
And so, I think Utah, putting the bulk of that money into football and then men's basketball on down. Plus, you look at the money that becomes available when you play in bigger bowl games, right? If you make the CFP, right, the financial windfall that comes from that. Same thing with NCAA tournament units in men's basketball. Women's basketball is going to start paying out NCAA tournament units as well, but it's going to be at a much lesser number. And so you've got to be all in on those two sports, and everybody else will get something, but certainly not as much. The thing I think is actually very interesting from a basketball standpoint, since I, make my home at, with a men's basketball podcast, is the Big East. The Big East doesn't have to worry about football. And so will we see, some of those basketball programs, elevate or continue to elevate? What does a UConn do, right? Like, they've desperately wanted to be competitive in football and it just hasn't happened, right? They're going to go heavy into basketball. Villanova with Kevin Willard joining, Ed Cooley at Georgetown, right? Like, you go on down the list.
Yeah.
And, it's going to be very interesting to see what the Big East does in basketball, kind of vis-a-vis some of these other schools that are having to balance between football and basketball and other sports.
That's a great point. Also, you mentioned women's basketball. I forgot them. That'll obviously be right there, third or fourth for who probably gets that NIL from a Utah perspective too, right? But just looking at this settlement, like all the things that come out of it, a couple of interesting takeaways. Number one, $2.8 billion is going to be paid back to ex-athletes over the past 10 years. I don't know why it's only 10 years, but that's insane. Like, it's an average of $120,000 a player for over 10 years, basically. Like, that's insane. And I do think that's fair because there's guys who've missed out on that opportunity back in the collegiate level. One of the most fascinating things to me, like in this report, and Ross Dellinger, Yahoo Sports, I recommend all of you go read his article if you want more clarity on this. There's been several Utah beat guys who've covered how this relates out to Utah, have done a really good job too. But one thing that just fascinates me, not just for Utah, but from a college football perspective, Andrew, this is a report on there. First year cap, $20.5 million. Massive that Utah's going to hit that. School escalators expecting it could go as high as $33 million by the 2035 season. We could have football programs spending close to $30 million on their roster from a season. Like, that's in the future. That is insane. But based on the more revenue they generate, I understand why that number is going to go up.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to go from, college athletes driving sort of these beater cars, right, back when we were in school, to probably driving some of the nicest cars on campus and just having it trickle down from there. But yeah, I mean, it's a machine, right? Like, college football, the NFL, right? Like, you get to this point in the year, right? We're recording in June, and people would probably kill for a Thursday night, Clemson versus Wake Forest football game right now. I mean, it's just like people just go nuts for this stuff. And so the fact that the money just will continue to escalate, not surprising at all. Not surprising that they've built in those escalators as well.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch and see. There's also lots of talk about, hey, the College Sports Commission, can they get this finalized? And basically what that's going to do is be like, make sure you're giving a fair NIL deal to an athlete. Like, you can't just pay him and have him do nothing. Like, he has to do something for your company or brand. It's very interesting. The House settlement was the first domino, and now a lot of other ones are going to fall too. So very interested to continue to cover this, but I am happy it's finally here because it's been talked about, as we mentioned, Andrew. They had to July 1st. Like, it's been so long coming. So thankfully they finally got it locked in. One thing Utah men's basketball was able to lock in was a commit, and he's going to be playing for this team in the 2025 class. We're going to tell you about the 12th edition of the Utah men's basketball roster in one moment. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our great friends at FanDuel. FanDuel is here because what does FanDuel do? Has you covered for the NBA Finals. Every night delivers just incredible performances, major momentum shifts, and can't miss moments. We're just 2 games into the finals, and it's already been an incredible ride so far. Whether it's a game-winning shot like we saw from Halliburton in Game 1 or a breakout performance, there's never a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game or tip-off, and even live, too. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big, too. Which players do you think are going to show up in the biggest moment? Is a Lou Dort going to be someone who balls out? Can Miles Turner raise his level of play? All of it can be found on FanDuel. If you've got a read on who's heating up, why not back it up with a same-game parlay? You can head over to FanDuel right now. It's the perfect time to sign up because at FanDuel.com, you can place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets. That's right. Win your first $5 bet, get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Andrew, talking some Utah men's basketball. Utah landed a commit, and a lot of times this is commitment season for 26. This is a commitment in the class of 2025 that Utah was just able to land. They landed a point guard from Finland. Elmeri Abbey comes over to this Utah program, and I do think he's a guy that, hey, he's 6 foot, 190 pounds, but this guy, we can talk about his numbers, what he did in a moment. I think there's a chance he can do some things this season for Utah. Is it the most likely? Probably not, with some of the veteran and transfer additions they've mapped out too, but 12th man on this roster and a point guard who he's a guy who averaged 5 assists per game last year. Utah, they have some guys who can pass it, but I don't know if they're necessarily pass first guards. So that's why I think Abbey could come in and make a difference for this Runnin Utes squad.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly a guy that they wouldn't necessarily need to rely on for his scoring, right? And that's something that I think when you bring in, the number of scorers and wings and just, guys that with pretty high upside that Utah's brought in this offseason, you need somebody that can just kind of get the ball to them. And so I think Elmeri Abbey is going to be a really nice addition that way. I talked to somebody who is familiar with his game over in Finland, said he's built a little bit like a running back. And when he kind of puts his shoulder down and goes to the hoop, that's kind of where he's going to have a strength. A little bit like Johnson at UCF when, they won on that last minute bucket where he, put his shoulder down and got to the hoop. But he certainly is an intriguing prospect. He joins Kendall Sanders as the true freshman that are going to be on the team. And then, you're building from there. Alex Jensen's talked a lot about, building, foundational elements. I know Alex mentioned this when you had him on last week. And this certainly seems like a guy that's a foundational piece, maybe a little bit of a late bloomer given, the lack of offers on his offer list, but that shouldn't, at this point in international basketball recruiting, that shouldn't scare anybody away from thinking that this guy could be an impact player either this year or down the road.
Yeah. I mean, he averaged, this comes to us from Brandon Judd, who did a great job for the Deseret News, said he averaged 19.5 points per game, 5.8 rebounds, and 5.1 assists last season during the 24-25 season in the one of the basketball academies in Finland. Only 19-2, as we mentioned, like that's a massive thing for his age too. For the U18 team, so the national team, 15 points, 3 boards, and an assist too. So against some international competition, it showed like, hey, he can do some things here as well. I have him right now probably as the third point guard on this team. West Kentucky transfer Mick Henry, I believe it is, like there, and then Brown from FDU probably be the next guy I look at in that right there. But because of his pass first game, maybe he has a chance to rise above some of those guys. Where do you see him on the depth chart right now?
Yeah, I think it would be fair to put him in that sort of third guard, like point guard off the bench. I mean, obviously you mentioned Don McHenry, Terrence Brown Jr. Those guys are going to be probably your starting backcourt, or maybe with Chapa Moore there from coming in from Syracuse. But I certainly think that he's a guy that could come in, give some good minutes, like I said, not necessarily be relied on as a scorer and just kind of do the fundamental things. And I think that, bringing in a guy like Alex Jensen, that's what Utah basketball is going to get back to, right? Is some of that fundamental basketball that made those teams in the late 90s, early 2000s, so deadly, despite the fact that they, didn't have the highest number of athletes on the team, so you get a guy that comes in with a pass first mindset, all sorts of possibilities open up there for him.
Yeah, there's tons, and there's tons for this team. They have 12 additions. So one of the things that also comes with the house settlement is the roster limit cap. So you can have 105 guys on your roster now for football. For basketball, that's 15, meaning 3 to go if you're Utah. For me, when it's like, okay, where else should Utah go? I would like to see them add a center. I know they want to be more athletic and fast. I should just say like a little bit of a bigger center. I mean, this is a team with a lot of 6'8" guys right now. Can you win that way? Yes. Are you risking giving up some rebounding numbers? I would also say yes. So I'd like to see them add another center, I think, and maybe another veteran guard, but portal season's dried up too. So I don't know how many of those are left out there as well. And I mean, they're okay on forwards, but grabbing another one there definitely doesn't hurt either. Where would you go if you're Utah with these last 3 roster spots for men's basketball?
Yeah, I still think you need a true knockdown shooter, right? And like you said, I mean, the portal may be a little bit dried up, but you've got some international possibilities that are still out there with the NBA withdrawal deadline passing. We've seen a rash of international commitments, kind of all over the map here in college basketball the last couple of weeks. And so, I think that they could certainly tap into that, another 20, 25, kind of under the radar kid out of high school wouldn't surprise me. And then, just some more front court help and depth. I mean, you're not going to be able to play all 15 guys, right? And so, you have to factor that in as well. How much NIL is left, that kind of thing, that all factors in. I still do think that if you're going to give up size in the front court, you do have to have some pretty consistent shooting, which is what we've seen out of a lot of the programs that have gone smaller in the front court, like a Houston, like a Baylor. They had, really nice shooting on the outside, guys that could get their own shot and knock down their own shot. And so I'd love to see Utah add somebody kind of in that realm. But it'll be interesting to see, with 3 roster spots left now with the move to 15, it'll be interesting to see how aggressive they are in adding more players.
I totally agree with you on shooting. And I think, especially at this point in the stage with the portal, like if there are guys that are left that are good shooters, they usually come with a flaw, right? It'll be like, oh, he can't attack off the dribble. A lot of shooters, it'll be, hey, defensively, it's not there. But I do think it's worth it to increase something a roster deficiency. If you have a shooting deficiency, I think it's worth investing in a shooter, even if you go, oh, well, it could hurt our defense a little bit because you're surrounding him with other defenders. You need that plus, and I still think it's worth bringing in a guy like that. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think part of the problem, the last couple of years is that they've had a number of shooters and, not enough defenders. Yeah. But then the shooting would dry up if they tried to put too much effort in on the defensive side. So it's one of those things where, you take one with the other, you lose a little bit here on the defensive end. If you've got a guy that can score, I think that, in the Big 12, with the schedule that they're going to play, you've got to be able to have guys that consistently make shots, which sounds like super, Captain Obvious stuff, but it's true, What
do you think of the shift away from, for the last few years, we're going to talk about Brandon Carlson, Lawson Lovering this last season, even an Ezra Sarr in some ways, although size-wise he might be more comparable to these guys. What do you think of the hard shift away from the center? I think if I'm Utah, I would like to still add some with a little more size, as I mentioned, but I'm okay with the idea of going a little smaller. I'm just also going to be concerned because I do think you still like that size to be able to gobble up rebounds.
Yeah, I think if you're not going to have a traditional center, a back to the basket guy, a guy that you can park down there, which again is something that Utah, with the offense that they ran under Craig Smith, it's kind of that 5 out where you've got the center at the top of the key triggering everything rather than just camping him in the lane where, like a Zach Edey was, for example, at Purdue. I know, hard to compare our guys to the player of the year, but
I know what you mean. Yeah.
But that's where we are. And so I think that the big trait that you're going to need if you've got, undersized bigs is they've got to be able to finish through contact like a Jawan Roberts, like a Norchad Omier, or, and they've just got to be uber aggressive in getting those rebounds, right? Like a Foose down at BYU, right? 6'6", 260 pounds or whatever he was, and just moved people out of the way, right? Like if you're not going to have a traditional big, traditional center, like a Brandon Carlson, like a Ryan Kalkbrenner, even who's a little bit more skilled, then you're just going to have to have somebody that, can kind of move people out of the paint.
Mm-hmm. Who's your starting 5 right now for Utah? I lean Faye, but obviously Okonkwo has a great chance. And I don't know, maybe they really want to go small and start Dawes. I think that's a little too small for my liking. How do you read the center position right now for Utah?
I think it's going to be the most fascinating battle of the entire fall camp is whether you go with Faye or you go with Okonkwo. Okonkwo's a 5th-year guy. He's got all of the experience. He's been in some big spots, played in championship games, all of those things. Faye, I think, probably has more talent, more upside, more, sort of high potential in terms of, being able to fill up a stat sheet. And so I think that's going to be really fascinating. And probably one of the factors is going to be if Don McHenry is your starting point guard, mm-hmm. he's got some familiarity with him, with both of them having come from Western Kentucky. Yeah. And so maybe that gives Faye a little bit of a leg up. We did this a couple of weeks ago when I was on, I think, talking about the starting 5, and I've talked about it on my podcast. At the time, I was an Okonkwo lean. I think right now, assuming he's fully healthy, recovered from his injury, I'd be a Faye lean at this point as your starting 5, and then Dawes, at the 4 with the rest of the team being filled out with our Auburn transfer, whose name is escaping me at the moment.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Then,
It's not Howard. Is that Howard? Yeah.
Ja'Kai Howard. There you go. Thank you. And then McHenry and Terrence Brown, and so I think it's that's kind of where my lean is at the moment.
Yeah, I'm only I go back and forth between, I think right now I'm going to swap Brown and Moore. Moore and McHenry is the backcourt for me right now as we sit here in June. And I'm very curious to see how Terrence Brown, 20-point per game score at FDU, massive leap. But you mentioned earlier, Zach Edey, we've seen that FDU team a couple years ago knock off Zach Edey led Purdue deep. So those guys can obviously play. And look, if you're a college basketball player, you can play. So these guys, it'll be very interesting to see how Alex Jensen does end up shuffling around this lineup. And speaking of shuffling around this lineup, before we talk about Brandon Carlson in a moment, I'm just looking at, I have a list pulled up here of like the additions that Utah's made to their roster this year. It also on 24/7 Sports shows me where everyone went. We just in the first segment spent time talking about like the current state of college athletics. Andrew, it is crazy that there was one guy back from last year's team, Keanu Dawes. I think Baylor has no one back. Yep. I think I saw, but like when I open the list of Utah players from last year, Sharaf Jams, South Carolina, Asar, USC, Keller, Utah State, Little, UC, or the school in San Diego, whatever it is called, Erickson, Hawaii, Wallene, Clemson, like Teat, Sac State. Like that's just insane that all these guys, and this is happening all across the country. This is not a Utah issue. It's amplified when you lose your coach, obviously, but even Baylor, who's got one of the best coaches in the sport, happened to them too. It's still just wild that this is the era we're in. I hope that with Alex Jensen, this number's like more 2 to 3 per year that stay, but it's going to be hard pressed for it to be like, oh, you kept half and you lost half. Like, I think those days are long gone.
Yeah. I mean, as Utah fans, we've been dealing with, multiple transfers out of the program since the late Larry days, right? So we've been doing this for almost a decade already. Sure. Now it's the standard in college basketball. It's wild to see, teams turning their rosters over completely and almost like, without batting an eye, right? Like, Drew at Baylor, he's a Hall of Fame level coach. He's won a national championship. And, I think, I know that Alex Jensen wants to keep guys. He's made a point of that this offseason, that these are guys that have years of eligibility left in a lot of cases. He doesn't want to have to replace his team every year, but, it's one thing to say that. It's another thing if, Chapa Moore comes in, has a massive year, and then Arizona comes calling, or, somebody else comes calling. And so that I think is going to be very fascinating to see moving forward here, again, with all of the house settlement stuff that we've talked about. And, all of these other factors here is, can you keep your team together if they have success, at a place like Utah, which is going to be a, middle, I think, middle of the Big 12 type team at their best, at least these first, year or two, right? Like it's going to take some time to get, the credibility to move up into the top half. So can you hang on to your players if they have a big year? That's going to be fascinating to watch.
Incredibly challenging. And you mentioned too, like we saw this happen a couple of years ago with Kaba going down to BYU. Like that's the concern. You just mentioned Arizona. If it's your rivals, your in-conference opponents, and Baylor was one who lost one to BYU. Like that's the scary thing is it's not like, oh, they leave and now they're gone from the conference. Like, oh no, they play at a rival 40 minutes away, or we're gonna have to see them twice a year next year too. It's just one of the things that's challenging about the current age of college athletics and a challenge that Utah basketball has to face. One thing that go.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, go look at Cincinnati's roster. It's littered with Big 12 transfers.
Yeah. That's what's nuts is there's all this crossover and everything. There's not going to be loyalty to me isn't the right word because of the deals these guys are being offered. Like I think almost anyone would take them. You got to remember most of these recruits too. It's not like they grew up in Utah, dreamed of playing at Utah. Like most of these guys, it's like, hey, came in, sold on a vision with a coach too. And regardless of if the coach gets moved on, like if you got a deal like that, generational money, you're going to have to take it. But either way, one guy was incredibly loyal to this Utah team, and maybe the last one we'll see like this for a while just because of the current era, Brandon Carlson. Brandon Carlson has a chance to win a ring, and I think it's just awesome, Andrew, that we're at this point where Brandon Carlson on the Thunder, the former 7-foot center here at Utah for those 5 full seasons. Played in 32 games this season with the Thunder overall, average 3.8 per game. It's been fun to see him going with this Thunder whenever he can. Like, he'll be at the end, like, barking in the mic like the teams do too. It's just been fun to watch him a part of this. And a guy who gave so much to Utah, a Utah team that wasn't able to reach the high level. I'm glad his first year in the NBA, he gets to be a part of a team that is playing on the biggest stage, already won a conference finals, and has a chance to win the NBA finals.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of reasons to just be thrilled for Brandon in the situation, right? You mentioned it. He gave his all to Utah. He passed on bigger deals to stay at Utah for his last year. And, you look at a team like the Thunder, and I'm sure, you've got a number of Jazz fans that are listeners of this podcast as well. That's what the Jazz are trying to do, right? They're trying to be the Thunder. And when you look at teams in the NBA and you say, what teams are the best at evaluating talent, Oklahoma City is right up there.
Oh, yeah.
And when Toronto let him go, they jumped on him, gave him a 2-way contract. Like you said, he played a number of times, up with the Thunder. I know they want to hang on to him, but he's going to be an unrestricted free agent this year. But yeah, he has a chance to win a ring in his first year in the NBA. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. Plus, he went viral a few weeks ago with in 80-degree weather wearing a purple sweater to the Thunder game. So, I mean, the world is this kid's oyster right now. And having had him on my podcast for, 2 years, couldn't be happier for the success that he's seeing. And, they seem to really like his teammates seem to really like him. He's not just like a hanger on, you know what I mean? He's part of that group. And I love seeing it.
I love it too. I still remember as everyone loves when I mention this because I mentioned a billion times on the show, right? It's former intern inside University of Utah Athletic Department. First student story I did on the basketball team was Brandon Carlson. Still remember going up to Craig Smith's office at the time, and like Brandon came in and we talked. And I remember he's like, I dunked on Jabari Parker once. And I was like, did you really dunk on Jabari Parker? And he showed me the video of him dunking on Jabari Parker. I was like, oh, no way, that's sick. So couldn't happen for a better guy. So excited for him and the opportunity he has. And it's awesome to see a Utah player with a chance to win a ring again. And a couple of years since Kyle Kuzma. And obviously, Kyle Kuzma makes up one of 3 or 4 now with Brandon Carlson. So it's Kuzma, Carlson, DeLon Wright, who had a good run with the Knicks this year too. And of course, Pirtle, who's putting together a nice career still in Toronto, back San Antonio, Toronto. He's bounced back and forth. He's doing a great job up there. So that's 4 Utes in the NBA right now. And under Alex Jensen, I do think has a chance to grow to be even more, Andrew. In fact, I think it should. You look at the staff and the talent they've put together with this roster, the staff, I mentioned all the experienced veterans you have there, and NBA GM. I think that number is going to grow. There are 10 Big 12 players in the finals, so it shows you, too, from this conference, you can reach that high level. The Big 12 consistently the last decade has been the best conference, you could say, in college basketball, too. So that number of Utes in the pros right now, it's 4. I think it's definitely increasing here in the near future.
Yeah, I don't see why not. And, you look at a guy like Keanu Dawes sticking with the program, with Alex Jensen, with Coach Chill, their connections in the NBA. You have to think that he's going to be a guy that gets a look, right? Ja'Kai Howard, right? Upside for days, so certainly I think we'll start to see more, Utahs in those NBA bios for some of these players. That's for sure.
Totally agree. And it's exciting to look forward to the future of Utah basketball and the future of college athletics with the House settlement now in its wild times, and especially, Andrew, on the basketball court. If people want to keep up with the latest for Utah, where they need to head over to.
Yeah, at Runnin Hoops Pod over on X. Help me rebuild my following that I lost when I lost my account. And then Runnin Hoops Podcast, wherever you get a podcast. Try to put out new content every week. It's obviously the slow time of year in a lot of ways, but I mean, we're going to get Big 12 scheduling pairings here within the next couple of weeks. I would imagine the non-conference schedule for Utah basketball, and of course, 3 roster spots still left to go. And if you're like JT and you're having to stifle a yawn, it can help put you to sleep too. The Runnin Hoops Podcast, right? Like, we serve everything. That's what we do over on the podcast. So
I've done 2 of these shows back to back. I want to defend you. Like, that is not the reason. That was good, though. That was really good. Throwing that in there. Oh, you're the best, Andrew. Thanks for making the time, man.
Yeah. Have a good one. Thanks.
That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Utes. If you guys are in the market for a second listen to, make sure you check out the portal. Brian Smith is the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. Be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape. Find the portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. That's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Utes. We'll be back tomorrow, talk about the latest in Utah football and Utah athletics. Hope you'll join us then.